Modi-led government roping in veteran bureaucrat Shaktikanta Das to take over the mantle at the Reserve Bank of India at a time when relations between North Bloc and Central Bank, of course, have hit an all-time low. And then you also had that shock exit being announced by former RBI Governor Urjit Patel just less than 24 hours ago after a rather public and bitter spat with the government. Now, Shaktikanta Das will take over as the 25th governor of RBI, and his appointment has been made for a period of 3 years. Das, who served as the Economic Affairs Secretary up until May of 2017, was the key man behind planning and execution of the demonetization drive. This was, in fact, the first high-level bureaucratic rejig that we've seen in the finance ministry after the Modi-led government took over. The dawn of the new era at the banking regulator, and really the tasks ahead for Shaktikanta Das amidst what is come to be a very acrimonious standoff is what we're putting the focus on this evening on the show. And for that, let me cross over to my colleague Supriya Shrinate, who's joining in from the New Delhi studio as well. Well, Supriya, clearly the government wasting no time and moving very quickly.
Oh yes, I'm not surprised at all that the government moved quickly on this. There was a widespread speculation as to who will be the governor, what is going to be happening, what will the stance be, this uncertainty that was plaguing markets. And may I also dare add, it had something to do with the election verdict, and you know, this is a distraction of sorts from what is definitely not a good day for the BJP. But all said and done, Shaktikanta Das is going to be India's 25th RBI governor, and joining me on this show is a stellar panel right here. HR Khan, former RBI deputy governor, joins us on the phone line. We've got Nilesh Shah, Managing Director, Kotak AMC, Swaminathan Iyer, a consulting editor, and of course Maithili Busnurmat, consulting editor. Anant Narayan, money market expert, joins us all the way from Singapore. So thank you very, very much, each one of you, for joining us. Swami, if I may begin with you, Shaktikanta Das, a tried and tested bureaucrat who's been brought in, I'm presuming with an eye on this high voltage drama being played out between the RBI and the central government, where there is a very bitter standoff. Do you believe a bureaucrat is perhaps best suited right now to diffuse tension, and which is what Shaktikanta Das's top priority is going to be?
If you believe that the important thing is just to diffuse the tension, yes, it's a good choice. If you believe, on the other hand, that a strong and independent person should be heading the bank, then you might say this is not such a good thing. Now, there is a case, if you like, for having a somewhat flexible person who is significantly independent. And there is a case for having a completely separate independent person. You can make a case for both. In the case of Urjit Patel, when he came in, people said, this guy has no spine at all. He has given in to demonetization, which Raghuram Rajan fought against. And therefore, he was seen as somebody who is a very convenient tool of Modi, somebody who is not willing to stand up. Ultimately, he stood up. He stood up on pressures on the exchange rate, on the interest rate, on the governance of the public sector banks, and finally on the issue of the transfer of reserves, made such a strong point. So, you know, you cannot say that Urjit Patel was not flexible. He was flexible enough to accept demonetization, accept all the vilification that went with it. So he was not a completely inflexible man, and even then they said this is not good enough. I think this will go down poorly internationally. I think everywhere Shaktikanta Das will come in, and to the extent that people want to see some kind of calming of the waters between government and RBI, he will bring that around. I do not think this will necessarily be seen as the best outcome from an international point of view.
Okay. The government doesn't have international perception in mind. They have, I think what they need to do is smoke the peace pipe, and I'm presuming the reason why Shaktikanta Das did make the cut was that he will have the ability to bring in the healing touch to what are really, really frayed nerves. But your point, well taken. From a perception point of view, it may not go a long way. Before I go to HR Khan, Maithili, I will come to you, and I know you have a very different view on this, and you believe a career bureaucrat is someone who's best suited to at least reopen the lines of communication between RBI and the central government, and perhaps Shaktikanta Das is best suited to do that.
Well, one cannot really make such generalization, Supriya, because frankly we have had in the past bureaucrats who become very good governors. We also had economists who've been very good governors. So you could take the case of Dr. Y.B. Reddy, who was from the IAS, who turned out to be one of the best governors we had. Likewise, we had Dr. Rangarajan, who was a pure economist, an academic to boot, and he again was one of the best governors we've had to date. So one cannot really generalize, but to the extent that Shaktikanta Das does have experience of working in government, he understands the government perspective. At this juncture, as you yourself said, he might bring the healing touch, and I do not think international investors will necessarily see that this as being something that the government has instigated, because as I said, we've had good governors of who are economists, we've had good governors as bureaucrats, so I don't think markets will jump to any conclusions. Right now what you do need is somebody who will be able to have a dialogue with the government, and that I think Shaktikanta will be able to do.
H.R. Khan, as former deputy governor of RBI and one, who's seen two governors and the way they functioned, my question really is that in a conversation with the former RBI governor, he said you have to have someone who will have a backbone and who will be able to tell the government to back off. Do you believe Shaktikanta Das, to prove his credibility, to re-establish the autonomy and credibility of the institution that he's now going to head, will have to perhaps go a little out of his way to ensure that he does manage to tell the government to back off, because anything other than that is going to be read as being very pliable?
No, I understand. He has a perception battle to win, but let me tell 2 points here important. I believe he has long years of experience and he has the necessary expertise, having worked in government, having been on the board of RBI, having been a member of Finance Commission, and he had regular interactions with RBI, and he is also Sherpa on G20. So he has the right type of experience, and over the years he has acquired expertise. And second question, I fully endorse what Maithili said. Economist, non-economist, bureaucrat, non-bureaucrat, you can't generalize. And some people say that he has no PhD in economics. I think central banking in an Indian context is a full-service central bank. And for monetary policy, you have monetary policy committee. So it may not be the exact requirement that you have a thoroughbred economist with PhD to be governor. If you know Christian Lagarde, who is heading IMF, is not an economist nor a PhD. So I think you can't generalize. I think he comes with the right type of credentials. But his problem, as my predecessor colleague was telling, is an issue of perception, how the market views. He has come as a sort of somebody from government who will tilt government. But RBI institution is a huge institution with huge credibility. I think he will take a balanced view which is needed. And as far as I know, he is a man who can stand up and say what he thinks is right or wrong. He is also a man who will sit down and listen carefully what is being said. I think he has the right type of balance. I think in the current situation, he is eminently suitable. And perhaps he may have to make an effort to say that he appears to be balanced and appears to be both. Yeah, he appears to be both focusing both on autonomy as well as accountability. I think both the aspects probably he will.
No, I get your
important.
Yeah. I get your point about how he will have to win the perception battle, especially at such troubled times like these, when any appointment by the government in any case is going to be looked at very suspiciously. I think Shaktikanta Das's task is very cut out. He has to not just win the confidence of the institution, which he's now going to head, but also win the perception battle. And if that will entail going out of the way and perhaps not doing a thing or two, despite being told by the government, he perhaps needs to do that. But let me take this across to Nilesh Shah of Kotak AMC, who joins us. And Nilesh, through a conversation with multiple people, the markets, we were given to understand, were watching very keenly onto who the next RBI governor is going to be. And one of the reasons why they were doing so is because that would have explained the philosophy that the monetary authority is going to take, whether it's, whether it's on inflation, whether it is on, reserves, whether it is on NBFC and all of that. It would give a direction in that sense. What is the direction that somebody like you will draw from Shaktikanta Das's appointment?
So as a market We clearly believe that RBI is an institution and not an individual. And as Dr. Khan mentioned, that it's a large institution who has done its job with remarkable capabilities over last many years. Now, the new governor can be evaluated in two parts: one, capability; second, credibility. In terms of capability, his experience speaks for itself, so I don't have to vouch for it. The second thing is the credibility. Clearly, his work as Revenue Secretary or Economic Affairs Secretary is there in the public domain. But as you mentioned, there is a perception battle to be won. Now, today, market also believes that this credibility can be built over a period of time. He can build his perception as an independent governor over a period of time, and market will be happy to give that time to him. He will judge him on the actions taken rather than purely on the basis of perceptions or prejudices beforehand. So he has that cooling off period with the market to win the perception battle, and the steps which he takes will determine his credibility.
No, absolutely. And I think the markets should give him a chance and will give him a chance, just like the markets gave Subba Rao a chance all those years back. He was a career bureaucrat, brought in during troubled times when the relationship between Mr. Reddy and Mr. Chidambaram wasn't very smooth. But I'll go across to Anant. And Anant, the one uncomfortable question around Shaktikanta Das, despite his brilliant track record as an officer, an Oriya-speaking officer from the Tamil Nadu cadre, speaks Chase Tamil, was an industry secretary, then went on to become revenue secretary, was instrumental in GST, G20 Sherpa and all of that. I think the one thing that kind of stands out is his very, very big defense of demonetization. I remember when Mr. Modi chose to withdraw about 86% of all cash in circulation, the RBI was never a face of that exercise. The face of that exercise was Finance Ministry, and in particular, Mr. Shaktikanta Das, through multiple interviews and briefings, and he really was the face. So in some sense, people are a little wary of a man like that. Would you give him the benefit of doubt that he was an officer and, he had to defend a policy, even though he may not have agreed with it internally or may have raised issues over, he was just doing a bureaucrat's job? Or are you going to be someone who's going to be a little suspicious of that stint while he was defending demonetization, and you will, you'll take your time to give him credit for it?
Well, Supriya, look, in the normal course of events, distinguished career bureaucrat, we've had plenty of examples of them doing extremely well as RBI governors. And we would have given Mr. Das full benefit of doubt, give him the time, give him the space to prove himself. That shouldn't have been a problem. Unfortunately, this is not a normal situation. We've had a situation where the sitting governor has resigned, ostensibly citing personal reasons, but the belief is he's resigned because of serious differences with the government. And there are big outstanding issues with the government where there's not been a meeting of minds. This includes contentious issues such as the question of so-called excess capital on RBI's balance sheet, the question of allowing prompt corrective action banks to lend more freely, the question of forbearance on loans to in the Indian banking sector. These are contentious issues. Now, getting a person who's associated with the current administration to now head the RBI will unfortunately lead to the suspicion that here is the government trying to force the RBI to do its bidding. And here is a situation where all the stoic defense put up by an independent RBI so far will melt down. Now, the good news, of course, is we'll know in rapid time as to what really the situation is. We have a board meeting coming up. If at all the government is keen on doing this right now because it's an election year, they'll have to push the pedal quite fast. So we'll know one way or the other pretty fast. Getting a person who's associated with this current administration, as Swami was saying earlier, unfortunately will raise a bit of a suspicion with the overseas investors. We'll have to see how he actually opines on these contentious issues. If he's seen as giving in to some of these issues, reversing the stance taken by his predecessor, unfortunately that suspicion could then be confirmed. So as you rightly said, he's got his job cut out for him.
The basis of that, Anant, I get your point, but I think the basis of that suspicion is that we believe it was Urjit Patel alone who had reservations over all of this. The reality is it must have been an institution, and HR Khan, I think, is best placed on this panel to answer that question. Mr. Khan, the fact that, the RBI and the government couldn't see eye to eye on very specific issues, reserve sharing, excess liquidity for NBFCs and PCA dilution. My own presumption is it must have not been Urjit Patel alone who had reservations. It must have been an institutional reservation to issues like this. Do those issues go away instantly because a governor has been changed?
I really don't have deep insights to what has gone in the last few months on the issues you enumerated. But the point is, if you have proper analysis of data, so either you convince or be convinced. So if you have proper analysis, you have proper information, and it is shared, and each one has healthy respect for others' point of view, I think we can reach at some conclusion that this is the best thing to do. So it is not that this is one way or other. I think there is always a middle ground one can find. And mind you, this financial stability related issue is a joint responsibility of both government and RBI. I think we should have respect for each other's point of view. I think, and the direction from top also does matter. So what sort of direction it comes. So I think if there are proper analysis, it is backed up by empirical evidence, one can debate and arrive at some constructive conclusions.
Fair point. I think the direction will come from the top, and Shaktikanta Das in that sense will steer the RBI through issues like this. But Nilesh, the question also is going to be on what is his stance going to be on reserve. I know there is a committee that has been formed to look into ECF, but given his background, given his involvement with budget making over successive governments, he was the Joint Secretary Budget under Mr. Chidambaram. He was also the Department of Economic Affairs Secretary, so extremely crucial position during budget making in this, in the present establishment. The question really is, as somebody who understands the importance of fiscal management, or fiscal prudence, is he then going to be somebody who's going to be comfortable with sharing of reserves so instantly? Because the fear is, will reserve sharing stoke inflation? We don't know what it's going to be used for. Unless, we don't know it's going to recapitalize banks, we must not share it because this may be used to bridge the deficit. The fact that he's somebody who's involved with budget making, understands the fiscal management of the economy, is he going to be someone who's going to be open to sharing of reserves? I'm not trying to ask you to read his mind or speculate, but I'm just trying to understand from you, as someone who's worked in fiscal management, what is his response to something like this going to be?
So there are a couple of observations which I want to give. I mean, if we take the worst case estimate of an analyst on the street, which shows fiscal profligacy or fiscal overrun in this year, it is probably 0.2% or 0.3%. It is not 2 or 3 percentage point. You will require RBI's reserve if you want to bridge deficit by 2-3 percent point rather than 0.2-0.3%. So maybe the usage of reserves for managing fiscal deficit is not the question of this year, but of the future years. Second thing, if we see other alternate models like US Fed and European Central Bank, both have done repurchase programs, and European Central Bank bought debentures of a South African company which was making a leverage buyout of a European company and lost all the money. Now, we don't see this kind of debate in European televisions where analysts will be saying that, oh, now people will lose the faith on euro. They don't make this kind of statements over there. If you see US Fed during 2008 subprime crisis, they were buying out subprime mortgages from the banks. Now, when you buy out this kind of repurchase programs, isn't it giving away your reserves to the economy? So if we see the Western world, they have taught us that you should be fiscally disciplined, but they don't maintain fiscal discipline. They also tell us that you should be monetarily disciplined, but they don't follow their monetary discipline. So we have to do what is good for us. Let there be wise men who can take a call, what is adequate reserve, what is appropriate reserve, and that kind of decision which is good for ourselves taken by our wise men will be acceptable to the market.
Okay. Okay, Nilesh, give me a minute there. I'll go to Anant Narayan. And Anant, one of the questions that obviously comes to my mind when I look at Shaktikanta Das's new stint at the RBI is a statement that Arvind Subramanian, India's former chief economic advisor, makes in the book that he's just written, which is that somehow RBI missed the Draghi moment to do all it takes to contribute to growth. Shaktikanta Das comes from North Block. Up until very recently, before Subhash Chandra came in, he was the finance and the DA secretary. In some sense, should we expect RBI to do all it takes to kickstart growth and not just look at managing of economy through the price stability prism?
Look, I think on all the aspects that RBI has control on, it is important to have a proper mechanism of accountability. Not everything that RBI does is absolutely perfect. At the same time, you have to maintain the independence and the autonomy of the institution. On the specific areas that you raise, which is, has monetary policy been too tight in India in the past, and should it be a different framework right now? These are questions which should be asked. There's no harm in asking those questions, and they should be debated. Likewise, the valid question can be asked, has the supervision standards of RBI been appropriate, particularly with respect to, for instance, non-banking financial companies? These are questions, again, which should be asked. I think getting a new person in with the background of having been in the bureaucracy and in the government, these questions can be asked and can be debated with a cool professional mind, and hopefully we arrive at a framework which is better suited for the Indian context and helps growth as well as overall financial stability. And absolutely, getting a person like Shaktikanta Das, who knows both North Block and now will know Mint Street better, will hopefully bridge that gap of accountability.
Okay, Maithili, I'll come back to you because I'm going to have a larger discussion with Swami on politics a little later. Before I close this, I will come to you. In some sense, the fact that the government did not waste much time in appointing the next RBI governor does give us a sense of, there was a certain urgency to get the next man in. And this is happening at a time when you've got former central bankers like D. Subbarao or Raghuram Rajan all raising the red flags on issues that continue to lurk upon us, issues on the back of which Urjit Patel had to quit. There seems to be no redressal of that. There seems to be no review, no thinking through that. And a new governor has been appointed. And obviously someone who's been a part of, policy making, who's been a part of decision making in this present establishment. Is that something that should worry stakeholders?
No, we really do not know what position Shaktikanta Das will take once he is at the helm of the Reserve Bank of India. And it's a very good thing that the government has actually decided to fill up the vacuum, because it's never very good to leave an organization like the Reserve Bank of India headless, particularly at a time like this when there is so much global uncertainty. So I think one must compliment the government for having put somebody, a competent person, in the Reserve Bank of India. And as far as the communication between the Reserve Bank of India and the government is concerned, I'm sure Mr. Das will do a very good job of it, because one of the biggest drawbacks under Mr. Patel's tenure was the complete lack of communication of the Reserve Bank of India with the government, with the public, with the bankers. So there was this feeling that the Reserve Bank of India was a bit of an ivory tower. So I think that needs to change, and under Mr. Das I'm sure it will, because communication is a very important tool that all central banks use. Unfortunately, that was missing during Urjit Patel's tenure. So I think that will be reversed.
On that note, completely out of time, I'll hand it over back to Tanya to take it forward as far as the big other story is concerned, and that of course is India's elections, the 5 states. But Shaktikanta Das, a career bureaucrat, a very stable hand. We've had many opportunities of interacting with him, clear head. The reality is he's not somebody who's very malleable. He can say no very effectively when he has to, and one hopes he's going to do the same as the boss of Mint Street.